There are football matches that are remembered because of the trophies they help decide. There are football matches that survive in memory because of a single goal, a single save, a single moment that seems to freeze time. And then there are those rare matches that outgrow the game itself. Matches that stop belonging to statistics and scorelines and become stories passed from one generation to the next. Stories that feel larger than football. Stories that feel like warnings, legends, and history all at once. To understand what unfolded on the opening night of the 2026 World Cup, you first have to travel back through time, back to a night that still hangs over the sport like a ghost that refuses to leave. June 29, 2006. Nuremberg, Germany. Portugal against the Netherlands. What began as a contest between two ambitious football nations slowly transformed into something far darker and far more chaotic. Challenges became confrontations. Confrontations became battles. The referee reached for yellow cards so often that it seemed impossible he could continue finding them in his pocket. Then came the red cards. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the final whistle, 16 yellow cards and 4 red cards had been shown. Players were arguing, tempers were boiling, and the match had become so infamous that history would eventually remember it by a name that sounded less like football and more like warfare: the Battle of Nuremberg. For 20 years that match stood alone, a monument to footballing chaos. A record that seemed untouchable. A benchmark that felt protected by time itself. Generations of players came and went. Entire World Cups passed. New stars emerged. Old legends retired. Yet the Battle of Nuremberg remained secure in football folklore, its reputation growing stronger with every passing year. It felt impossible that another World Cup match could ever come close. Impossible. Until the world arrived in Mexico City. Until 83,000 voices filled the Azteca. Until the opening night of the 2026 FIFA World Cup began writing a story that nobody expected. The atmosphere before kickoff felt less like a sporting event and more like the opening scene of a global spectacle. The Azteca Stadium is not simply a football ground. It is a living monument. It has witnessed the greatest names in football history. It has seen tears, triumph, heartbreak, controversy, and immortality. It has hosted moments that shaped the identity of entire nations. And now, once again, the eyes of the world turned toward it. The opening ceremony unfolded with the kind of scale that only a World Cup can produce. Lights cut through the darkness. Music echoed across the stadium. Flags waved from every corner of the stands. Millions watched from homes scattered across continents while tens of thousands inside the stadium felt the electricity building around them. Then came the performances. Shakira returned to a stage that has become almost synonymous with football's biggest celebration, delivering a performance that reminded everyone why her voice has become part of World Cup history. Mana carried the pride and identity of Mexican music onto the global stage. Andrea Bocelli filled the stadium with a voice so powerful that even the noise of 83,000 people seemed to disappear beneath it. And then came a surprise that nobody had anticipated. Salma Hayek appeared unexpectedly, and the reaction was immediate. The stadium erupted. The roar that followed rolled through the arena like thunder. Yet perhaps the most meaningful moment arrived quietly. Layla Downs welcomed the world not only in Spanish and English, but also in Mixtec and Nahuatl, languages spoken long before modern stadiums existed, languages that carried centuries of history within them. It was a reminder that the World Cup is more than football. It is culture. It is memory. It is identity. It is the collision of past and present on the biggest stage imaginable. Every detail of the ceremony seemed designed to announce that this tournament intended to be unforgettable. But nobody could have predicted how quickly the focus would shift from celebration to confrontation. Nobody could have predicted that within hours, discussions about music, fireworks, and performances would be completely overshadowed by red cards, controversy, and a level of chaos that threatened to rewrite World Cup history. When the match finally began, there was an expectation that nerves would dominate the opening minutes. Opening games often carry tension. Players are cautious. Teams take time to settle. The weight of representing an entire nation on football's biggest stage can make even the most experienced professionals hesitate. But Mexico had no intention of waiting. The crowd sensed it. The players felt it. The energy inside the Azteca seemed to push them forward with every touch of the ball. Then came the mistake. A single moment. A single heavy touch from South Africa's Sapelo Yaya Sithole just outside his own penalty area. In football, entire stories can emerge from mistakes that last less than a second. This was one of those moments. Mexico reacted instantly. Space appeared where none had existed a moment earlier. Julian Quiñones saw it. He attacked it. And then, with remarkable composure, he struck the ball low beyond Ronwen Williams. The South African goalkeeper had no chance. For a split second there was silence as everyone processed what had happened. Then the stadium exploded. 83,000 voices merged into one deafening roar. The first goal of the 2026 World Cup had arrived. The opening chapter of the tournament had been written. Mexico led. South Africa trailed. And yet beneath the celebration was another story, one that many casual viewers did not fully understand. South Africa should never be underestimated. This was not a team that had wandered accidentally into the tournament. This was a group that had endured extraordinary challenges simply to arrive. In the days leading up to the match they had dealt with travel disruptions, administrative complications, uncertainty, frustration, and the exhausting psychological burden of not knowing whether everything would fall into place in time. Lesser teams might have collapsed under that pressure. Lesser teams might have allowed the early goal to destroy their confidence. But South Africa refused. They continued fighting. They pressed higher. They challenged harder. They reminded Mexico that World Cup matches are never won in the opening 10 minutes. There was resilience in every tackle. Determination in every run. Pride in every duel. Even as the crowd pushed Mexico forward, South Africa refused to disappear. And perhaps that refusal, that stubborn resistance, was what slowly transformed the match into something far more volatile. Because tension rarely arrives without warning. Chaos rarely appears from nowhere. It grows quietly. It builds beneath the surface. Every challenge becomes slightly harder. Every disagreement lasts slightly longer. Every foul carries slightly more emotion than the one before it. The temperature of the match was rising, and almost nobody noticed just how dangerous that rise was becoming until it was already too late. Football has a way of revealing character when circumstances become unbearable. It is easy to look composed when everything is going your way. It is easy to follow a game plan when the score is level, when the crowd is quiet, when emotions remain under control. But the World Cup has never been a place where comfort survives for very long. The pressure is too immense. The stakes are too high. Every touch carries consequences. Every mistake becomes part of a permanent record watched by millions. And as the second half unfolded inside the Azteca, that pressure began exposing everyone. Players, coaches, officials, entire nations. The first major crack appeared when Sapelo Yaya Sithole, the same player whose earlier mistake had helped create Mexico's opening goal, found himself at the center of another defining moment. Football can be cruel in the way it chooses its protagonists. One unfortunate touch had already placed him under a spotlight he never wanted. Now fate returned for a second visit. The challenge came. The referee reacted. And suddenly the tournament had its first sending off. The first red card of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. In an instant South Africa's task became infinitely more difficult. 11 men became 10. Space became harder to cover. Every sprint required more energy. Every defensive shape became more fragile. Every player now had to run for two people instead of one. Yet what followed was perhaps the most impressive thing South Africa produced all evening. They did not surrender. They did not fold. They did not behave like a team waiting for the final whistle. Instead they continued competing with a determination that demanded respect. Every tackle carried urgency. Every interception felt like an act of defiance. Every forward run seemed powered by the refusal to accept inevitability. The scoreboard said they were losing. The numbers said they were outmatched. Logic said the match should slowly drift toward a comfortable Mexican victory. But World Cup football has never cared very much about logic. As South Africa fought to remain alive, another story was preparing to take center stage. It was a story years in the making. A story built through pain, fear, recovery, and unimaginable persistence. Because standing on the touchline waiting to enter the match was a man who understood better than almost anyone what it means to lose everything and somehow find a way back. Raul Jimenez had spent years carrying a burden invisible to most spectators. To many he was simply a striker, a veteran, a respected professional nearing the final chapters of his career. But behind that public image existed a story that transformed his every appearance into something remarkable. In November 2020, during a Premier League match in England, Jimenez challenged for a ball in the air and suffered a collision so violent that football immediately stopped matching. The injury was devastating. A fractured skull, emergency surgery, uncertainty, fear, questions that extended far beyond football. People wondered whether he would ever play again. Some wondered whether he should. Careers had ended for less. Dreams had disappeared for less. Entire futures had been rewritten by injuries less severe. Yet somehow Jimenez survived it. Somehow he returned. He trained. He rebuilt. He endured setbacks that never made headlines. He fought battles that cameras never recorded. He learned to trust his body again. He learned to trust his instincts again. He stepped onto football pitches carrying not only physical scars but also the psychological weight of knowing how close everything had come to ending. And still he kept moving forward. Still he kept scoring. Still he kept representing Mexico. The protective headguard became part of his identity, a visible reminder of everything he had overcome. Every goal afterward carried additional meaning because every goal represented a life that had refused to break. Yet fate was not finished testing him. In the months leading to this World Cup, another devastating blow arrived. His father passed away. The man who had witnessed every stage of the journey. The man who had believed before anyone else did. The man who had watched from the sidelines during childhood and celebrated every success that followed. Suddenly the person who had shared the dream from the beginning was no longer there to witness its final chapters. Grief entered the story. And grief changes everything. Then came the moment. The kind of moment football occasionally produces that feels almost scripted despite being entirely real. Mexico pushed forward. The opportunity appeared. Jimenez found himself in the right place at the right time. The finish was precise, clinical, decisive. The ball crossed the line. The stadium exploded once again. But this celebration was different. This was not merely a goal. This was the release of years. Years of pain. Years of doubt. Years of recovery. Years of sacrifice. Years of carrying emotional weight that no statistic could ever measure. Jimenez pointed toward the sky. Tears appeared. The noise around him seemed to disappear beneath the significance of the moment. 83,000 people watched not simply a footballer celebrating a goal, but a son speaking to his father without words. The scoreboard recorded it as Mexico's second goal. History will remember something deeper. A 35-year-old man had scored his first World Cup goal. Not his first tournament appearance. Not his first international match. His first World Cup goal. At 35. After surviving an injury that threatened his career. After surviving an injury that threatened far more than his career. After losing his father. And he had done it in the Azteca, the stadium woven into the dreams of generations of Mexican footballers. There are moments when football becomes bigger than tactics. Bigger than formations. Bigger than rivalries. This was one of them. For a brief period the chaos disappeared. The controversies disappeared. The arguments disappeared. The tournament stopped being about governing bodies, officiating decisions, media narratives, and statistics. It became about one human being standing beneath the lights of the most famous stadium in his country, carrying every scar of his journey with him and finding redemption on the grandest stage imaginable. It was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. It was unforgettable. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded everyone watching why sport continues to matter. But the World Cup was not finished revealing its personality. The emotion had barely settled before the chaos returned with even greater force. South Africa, now chasing the game with 10 men, launched a rare attack. A burst of speed carried them forward. Hope briefly reappeared. Then came another challenge. Another whistle. Another decision. Mexico's Cesar Montes attempted to halt the breakaway. The referee reacted instantly. The crowd held its breath. Then came the gesture that changed everything once again. A red card. Mexico reduced to 10 men. The stadium erupted into confusion. Players surrounded the official. Supporters screamed from the stands. South African players sensed opportunity. Mexican players felt injustice. Neutral viewers sensed history approaching. 3 red cards. 3 dismissals. 3 moments that pushed the opening match of the 2026 World Cup into territory few had imagined possible. Suddenly conversations about the Battle of Nuremberg no longer felt ridiculous. They felt relevant. One more dismissal would equal the most infamous disciplinary record in World Cup history. One more. The possibility hovered over every challenge. Every tackle. Every confrontation. The game stopped feeling predictable. It stopped feeling controlled. Instead it became something raw and unstable. Something capable of producing absolutely anything. And as the final minutes approached, the atmosphere inside the Azteca no longer resembled a routine football match. It felt like the opening chapter of a tournament determined to announce itself through drama, controversy, emotion, and complete unpredictability. By the time the match entered its final phase, the football itself no longer felt like the only story unfolding inside the Azteca. Something larger had taken shape. The stadium was still roaring. The players were still fighting. The scoreboard still mattered. Yet beneath all of it ran another narrative, one that seemed to capture a truth about modern football and perhaps about the World Cup itself. Because the World Cup has never been merely a tournament. It has always been a collision of dreams and institutions, of emotion and administration, of unforgettable human moments and powerful organizations attempting to control them. Last night, those worlds collided repeatedly. Every time the game seemed ready to settle, another layer of drama emerged. Every time the focus returned to football, something happened that dragged attention somewhere else. It was as if the tournament was announcing from the very first night that it would not be contained within 90 minutes, scorelines, or carefully prepared ceremonies. The governing bodies had spent years planning this World Cup. Every schedule, every broadcast, every security arrangement, every promotional campaign had been meticulously organized. Billions of dollars had been invested. Countless meetings had been held. Endless presentations had been delivered. Yet as football has done throughout its history, reality refused to follow the script. Reality chose chaos. Reality chose unpredictability. Reality chose the kind of drama that no committee could design and no executive could manufacture. And nowhere was that more obvious than in the moments surrounding the referee. Wilton Sampaio walked onto the pitch carrying one of the most difficult responsibilities in sport. A referee at a World Cup opening match is not merely officiating a football game. He is managing pressure from players, coaches, supporters, broadcasters, sponsors, governing bodies, and millions of viewers around the world. Every decision becomes global instantly. Every mistake becomes permanent. Every controversial moment becomes a debate that can last for years. Throughout the evening, that pressure continued building. Fouls became arguments. Arguments became confrontations. Emotions rose higher with every passing minute. Then came one of the most talked about moments of the night, a moment that spread across social media before many supporters had even left the stadium. FIFA had introduced a new communication system for this tournament, presenting it as a step toward greater transparency. The concept sounded simple. When VAR played a significant role in a decision, the referee would use a stadium microphone to explain the ruling directly to supporters inside the venue and to viewers watching around the world. In theory, it was modern, clear, and progressive. It was supposed to reduce confusion. It was supposed to build trust. It was supposed to bring fans closer to the decision-making process. But football, as it often does, exposed the difference between theory and reality. When Sampaio raised the microphone and began explaining one of the match's crucial decisions, something unexpected happened. Large sections of the crowd struggled to understand him. Television viewers replayed the clip repeatedly. Social media exploded with reactions. Some laughed. Some criticized. Some genuinely tried to figure out what had been said. Within minutes, the explanation itself had become a story. A system introduced to create clarity had somehow generated even more confusion. It was a small moment in isolation, perhaps even a harmless one. Yet it felt symbolic. Symbolic of the strange contradictions that had surrounded the tournament long before a ball had been kicked. Symbolic of the gap that sometimes exists between intention and execution. Symbolic of how difficult it is to manage a competition that captures the attention of the entire planet. Then there was the issue of the hydration breaks, a controversy that seemed minor until people began looking more closely at what it represented. FIFA had mandated cooling breaks during matches due to concerns about player welfare and the extreme temperatures expected across several host cities. On the surface, the decision was sensible. Protecting athletes is not controversial. Nobody wants players collapsing from heat exhaustion on football's biggest stage. Yet controversy emerged because context matters. Only days earlier, discussions surrounding supporter access to water inside stadiums had generated criticism from multiple directions. Fans questioned the logic. Commentators questioned the planning. Public figures questioned the messaging. Eventually adjustments were made, but the debate lingered. And when the opening match featured mandatory hydration breaks for players while memories of those earlier discussions remained fresh, many supporters interpreted it as another example of an organization struggling to align its decisions with the realities facing ordinary fans. Once again, the issue itself was not enormous. Nobody will remember the cooling break decades from now in the way they remember great goals or legendary performances. But taken together with everything else, it contributed to a growing feeling that the tournament's opening night was revealing cracks beneath the polished surface. Small inconsistencies. Small contradictions. Small moments that individually meant little but collectively painted a more complicated picture. Because that is often how public perception works. Rarely is it shaped by one massive event. More often it is shaped by dozens of smaller moments that slowly accumulate until they form a narrative impossible to ignore. And then there was the story that never unfolded on the pitch at all. A story that existed hundreds of miles away and yet somehow hovered over the tournament's opening night like a shadow. Omar Artan. For many casual viewers, the name meant little. For those who follow officiating closely, it meant something historic. He was not simply another referee. He represented progress, achievement, a breakthrough that extended far beyond football itself. As the first Somali referee selected for a World Cup, his presence should have been one of the tournament's most inspiring stories. Years of dedication had carried him to the sport's greatest stage. Years of sacrifice had earned him a place among the world's elite officials. Yet while the opening match unfolded beneath the lights of the Azteca, Artan was not there. He was not managing the pressure. He was not making decisions. He was not speaking through microphones. He was not participating in the event he had worked so long to reach. Instead, circumstances beyond the football field had left him stranded and ultimately absent from one of the most significant moments of his professional life. The image itself carried weight. A man who had climbed every mountain placed before him, only to find the final obstacle waiting not on a football pitch but elsewhere entirely. And then, almost immediately after the opening match concluded, another development emerged. UEFA moved quickly and awarded him one of European football's most prestigious appointments. Suddenly, the referee who had been denied one major stage was handed another. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Football's governing structures had inadvertently created a story of disappointment and redemption unfolding alongside the tournament itself. Once again, the World Cup seemed incapable of producing a simple narrative. Every story contained another story beneath it. Every headline contained another layer waiting to be uncovered. Every answer generated new questions. And as supporters around the world attempted to process everything they had witnessed, from the red cards and emotional celebrations to the officiating debates and institutional controversies, it became increasingly clear that the opening night had delivered something far more significant than a straightforward football match. It had delivered a statement, a warning, a promise. Perhaps all three at once. Writing variant equals document ID equals 28461. What makes a World Cup unforgettable is rarely what the organizers expect. That is the lesson football keeps teaching, tournament after tournament, generation after generation. The moments that survive are not always the carefully choreographed ceremonies, the marketing campaigns, or the official slogans printed on banners. They are the moments that feel unplanned, human, messy, real. The moments that slip beyond control and become part of collective memory. Nobody planned for the Battle of Nuremberg to become immortal. Nobody sat in a boardroom and decided that a match featuring 4 red cards and 16 yellow cards would become one of the defining stories of the 2006 World Cup. It happened because football occasionally loses its restraint and reveals something raw underneath. Last night at the Azteca carried that same feeling. Not identical, not a copy, but familiar in spirit. 3 red cards. 9 men against 10. A referee fighting to keep authority over a game that kept pulling away from him. A stadium vibrating with tension. A tournament introducing itself through drama rather than control. One dismissal short of equaling the most infamous disciplinary record in World Cup history. Think about that for a moment. The opening match of the 2026 FIFA World Cup came within a single red card of matching a record that had survived for 2 decades because people believed it belonged to a different era. Football changed. VAR arrived. Officiating evolved. The game became more tactical, more measured, more controlled in many ways.